38. Eye of the Storm. Terran looked around, trying to place where he was. The sun shone through the mist of an autumn morning, the cool air prickling at his skin. He stood on a rocky precipice overlooking a valley. Rickon lay below, tucked into the trees, ripe fields of bronze grain sitting undisturbed, awaiting harvest. He glanced down the rock face, confused. The geography was similar, but this outcropping was at least double its normal elevation. "I wouldn't jump," a familiar voice teased. Terran froze. "Last time you tried, you managed to get hung up in that tree, remember?" The voice chuckled. He spun, knowing exactly who he would see. Nox? Nox stood before him, looking much the same as the last time they were together, except his hair had grown out and he'd shaved away his beard. The half-smirk he wore was identical. "How are you here? You're—" His voice caught. "Dead." Nox snorted and gave Terran a friendly shove. "I'm not dead." Terran stared at his friend and rubbed his shoulder where Nox had touched him. "I felt that." "Of course you did," Nox answered within his mind. Terran stumbled back in surprise. "What's happening?" His head ached as memories tried to surface all at once. His oath to Darius, days of traveling, conversations with Venier and Emilia. His pulse pounded in his ears, and he sat heavily on the rock, overwhelmed by the sensation. Worst of all were Emilia's whispered words echoing on repeat. "I release you before the sky." A fresh wound lay in his soul where she'd torn herself away. He dropped his head into his hands. "I need to fix this." "There is nothing for you to fix," Nox said as he sat next to him on the hard stone. "Of course there is. I've left Emilia alone." He paused, realizing who he was speaking to. Guilt crashed into his chest like a lead hammer. "Nox, Nox clapped him on the shoulder again. "That's a conversation for another time." He smiled at Terran like the statement was an inside joke. "Another time?" Nox turned serious, and his subdued voice spoke directly into Terran's thoughts. "He will understand." "Stop that," Terran growled. "I don't need you in my head." "You're actually in mine," Nox said with a shrug. "You aren't Nox, are you?" He gauged the Nox look-alike with a critical eye. In every detail, he looked like his friend, but something was off. Not the least of which was Nox's calm acceptance of his relationship with Emilia. Nox would rip me to shreds. "He would, but for now I'm close enough," Nox said. "I'm dead?" Terran asked. Nox let out a full-bellied laugh. "You're not getting out of this that easily." "Getting out of what?" Nox bent and picked up a small twig and started breaking off small pieces and tossing them into the updraft at the cliff edge. "You'll find out soon enough." Terran watched the small pieces of bark lift into the air. "I hate riddles." Nox smiled. "I know." Terran cast a begrudging smile at the ribbing. The cool air hit his lungs, and a cloud of breath hung before him. "This all feels real." Nox gave him an incredulous look. "Of course it's real. When have thoughts been anything other than real?" Terran ran his hand through his hair. "My mind is fractured, though, isn't it? I've failed to keep my oaths." Nox gestured out over the valley. "Does this look broken to you?" The landscape stood in stunning clarity. The ridges of the surrounding mountains in sharp relief from the blue of the sky, deepening in color as the sun continued to gain altitude. "No," he said carefully. "But something is off." Nox nodded. "You are dancing along the line of what's possible." "I'm trapped here?" "I don't see any chains." "You know what I mean," he growled, frustration growing. If he was trapped within his own mind, who knew what could be happening in the real world while he lay helpless? Or what Emilia is facing. "What are you going to do about it?" The unfulfilled oaths sprang forward from the shadows of his mind, a painful barb. He rubbed his forehead. The sunlight overhead flickered like there was a short in its celestial circuit. He cast a concerned look skyward. "That is worrisome," Knox said. "It's time to choose what you're going to hold on to and what you're going to let go." "I won't lay down my oaths to the sky or to Amelia," he said as he pushed himself to standing. If he was about to meet his end, he wanted to be on his feet. "If I break, I break." "Foolish," Knox scoffed. "Knox would know I would never betray an oath I took." "Maybe that is exactly why he is here." Terence stopped and looked at the figment of his friend. "You can choose what matters," he said. Could he really choose a new path forward? Echoes of Amelia's voice filtered into his mind. "Let go," it whispered. The words hit him as if they were physical blows. The sun flickered again, and the cast of the light changed its quality, turning gray. A cold wind picked up and pulled at him. Amelia's voice in the wind begged him to let go. He wouldn't. But neither could he lay aside his oaths to the Order and, by extension, to Darius. Each held a piece of his soul. Knox stood in the building storm, untouched by the elements. He held Taran with his silver gaze, piercing him with its intensity. "You have to choose." "I made this choice when I took my oaths," he shouted over the wind. The storm intensified, and pelting rain soaked the stone, making it slippery. He crouched to keep his feet beneath him and held his arm up against the droplets whipping into his eyes. "Oaths are sacred," Knox agreed, his voice cutting through the noise of the storm like a pure tone within his mind. "As is the intent they are spoken from. They were never meant to rob you of choice, but to clarify what is important, what is sacred. Oaths are vehicles to direct passion." Amelia's voice carried on the wind, wordless, heavy with the ache of loss. "For him?" "There is a way to honor your oaths." Knox's voice spoke softly within his mind. Taran locked eyes with his friend, struck by the words. Knox had walked this road before him. He had laid down his oaths to the Order, accepting weakness and ridicule in return, and had lived to honor the vows that mattered, those to the sky, to Amelia. A small smile pulled at Knox's mouth as understanding blossomed in Taran's mind. There was a cost in this choice, but it wasn't his integrity. "I renounce my oath!" he yelled into the darkened sky and the howling storm. The wind stole his words even as he spoke them and poured his intent into each syllable. As the last word dropped from his lips, the wind stilled and the sky cleared. The pain pressing in at his temples vanished. The sun above him regained its vibrancy, and he tipped his chin to the warmth and sucked in a long breath. Knox stepped up to his side and put a hand on his shoulder. "Cutting it a little close there, my friend." Taran chuckled as he looked around. A twill dipped and spun in the air over their heads, singing her morning song. "You know me. I like to push the limits." "I do," Knox said with a knowing look. "Start trusting yourself, will you?" Knox's mouth was still moving, but his words sounded as if they were across a great distance. The world spun, and a moment later Taran found himself alone and in the dark. It took a moment for Taran to comprehend the darkness was self-imposed. After the vivid dreamscape, the blackness behind his closed eyes was jarring. Engine vibration moved through the bed beneath him and into his fingertips. He opened his eyes and blinked as they adjusted to the dim cabin. He was on a medical cot in one of the caravan cars, strapped in securely. He pulled at his strength and pushed out at the straps. Nothing. No power met him. The sky had accepted his renunciation. It didn't sting as he thought it would, not nearly as sharp as the realization that Knox was still gone. It had been so natural to be talking with him once again. It wasn't him. He squeezed his eyes shut as a shiver ran through him at the immensity of all that had happened. After a few moments, he opened his eyes and scanned the narrow alcove for a way to release himself from the straps. If he remembered correctly, there were 2 such cot-like compartments in this vehicle. A transparent partition separated his alcove from the main cabin, but with no way to release his arms, he could not lower it. A door rattled, and soft voices entered out of Taran's line of sight. "I assure you, Miss Emilia, he is perfectly comfortable." "I need to see for myself," Emilia said. Taran tried to sit up at the sound of her voice and found himself pressed back as the straps auto-cinched tighter at the sudden movement. He grunted. Emilia gasped. "He moved!" Taran let out a breathless chuckle. "Of course I did. Get me out of here." Emilia was at the glass before he finished speaking, madly mashing the keypad for the alcove. "You came back!" Her eyes filled with tears as the partition retracted. She squeezed his hand. A tattered piece of himself clicked back into place, seeing her. He truly would move earth and sky for this woman. I don't believe it," the medic said, staring at Taran wide-eyed. "I've never—" He didn't finish the sentence before shifting to his next thought. "Elder Venye will be relieved." He gripped Emilia's arm excitedly and then rushed from the cabin. "Mind getting me out of here?" he asked, making a show of wiggling his hands at his side. A mischievous smile pulled at Emilia's lips before an interrupting thought had her frowning at him. "Since when do you patiently wait for someone to come help you?" He gave her a sheepish look. "Since I have no choice." She stared at him uncomprehendingly for a moment before she sucked in a sharp breath. "No!" Her hands shook as she pushed at the keypad and the straps retracted. "You were supposed to renounce your vow to me, not the Order." Her face crumpled in distress. "Not again. Not for me." Taran slid from the compartment, happy to find his basic coordination was still intact, and pulled her into his arms. "I told you I would never do that," he said, and kissed the top of her head before he rested his cheek in her hair. She squeezed him tight, and then stepped back, putting a little distance between them. His chest ached with realization. The shared bond between them was broken. Without the oaths, something had fundamentally shifted. He cleared his throat and forced a smile. "This was my choice." The tension in Emilia's shoulders released, and her puffed cheeks let out a breath. She met his gaze. "Venye said it was the only way to help you." "Thank you," he said, squeezing her hand. Her expression dropped, and a knot gripped his stomach. "Since relinquishing our oaths, I can feel my bond to Nox." She looked down at the chain around her neck, her fingers lightly tracing the thin line of white gold. "He was the love of my life." "I know." It was never a question. Taran had been a stand-in, and the private pain it caused him now was not hers to carry. He couldn't even find it within himself to be bitter. He loved Nox too. Friend, brother, family, all titles fell short of the bond they held. He nudged Emilia's chin, lifting it so she met his gaze. "It doesn't change anything. We're family." Her voice was soft when she finally spoke. "Releasing you was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. It felt like I was tearing off a piece of my own soul." "I'm still here." "Thank the sky for that," Venye said, interrupting the moment. "I'm sorry to intrude." Emilia stepped back, and Taran turned and bowed. Venye stood in the doorway between caravan cars with a genuine smile. Her eyes flicked between the two and seemed to be noting the distance between them. "Elder Venye," Taran said. "Good to see you up, Overseer. I'm not sure anyone has walked so close to a fracture and been able to tell of it. Are you well?" An involuntary shudder ran down his spine. Venye's final conversation with him came back with sudden clarity. She had pushed on every conflict within him, in the name of helping, but it didn't change the fact her meddling nearly broke him. Why? Because I found her out, or because she wanted me free? I found a new way forward. Venier nodded and smiled. I am happy to hear it. She turned to Emilia and stepped forward, reacting to Emilia's red-rimmed eyes. You were brave to release him. He's here because of your sacrifice. Emilia glanced at Taran, and he subtly shook his head in warning. Thank you, Elder, Emilia said. I'm sorry to cause you more suffering, dearest, Venier offered. Taran, when you are ready, come to my cabin and we can talk. The vehicle beneath them shuddered and slowed before coming to a halt. All three had to reach for the walls to keep their feet. Charles's voice came over the speaker. Elder, you are needed in the pilot cab. Venier keyed the comm in the compartment. What is it, Charles? His voice crackled back. A blockade, Elder.